Welcome to the series that has made me come to terms with the fact that while my delusions may be as grand as Carrie's, the girls certainly aren't. It's So in the City, episode 5, and we're making this bodycon dress from season 2, which I originally coined as the body is tea dress, but I'm backtracking on that because it's not a tea dress, it's a tank dress. I'm sorry. I know the styling is really important with this dress. Unfortunately, I don't have any Joe Biden aviators, a pair of knockers like that, or any designer purses currently. But there are 3 opportunities for sponsorship, so give me a call. My line is open, my DMs are open. Would love some sponsorship on any 3 of those fronts. Here's what you'll need for this project. At least a yard of stretch fabric. 4-way or 2-way works. You'll need thread and a machine. If you have a serger, even better. One thing that you might need for this project that a lot of people don't have access to is an ass that won't quit. I personally grew mine myself, made it from scratch, but if you don't have one, have a conversation with your ass and let it know that it needs to improve its work ethic. Skills for this project, very simple sewing skills. Very forgiving project. Pattern drafting is really easy. We're just tracing around a tank top and a skirt, or if you already have a bodycon dress, even better, trace around that. You will have to do armholes and neck hole bindings, but I will be teaching you how to do those, so don't worry. So let's go make this dress together. To make the pattern, you're going to take a tank top that is cropped at your natural waist and a mini skirt that comes up to your natural waist. Meet them at the waist and draw around them. You can draw around the entirety of the shape or just half, like I'm going to do. I drew around half and then I folded it in half to make sure it's a mirror image. Here I am straightening the bottom hem, and then you'll see me drawing straight up the middle a straight line so I can cut around that half shape and trace around it to create that mirror image, like I said. Then I took the front neckline down an inch so that it would be differentiated from the back neckline. Using a hip curve ruler, I redrew that front neckline, making sure that it was squared off along the center front. I only did this on one half of the pattern because I ended up splitting it in half and using the one side as the back pattern and one side as the front pattern. Since I wanted this dress to be really tight because it is a bodycon dress, I didn't add seam allowance around the shape. When I cut it out, you will see though that I did add seam allowance to the armholes, the neckline, and the shoulder seam because I do need it there for the bindings. Since I cut my pattern down the middle for the front and the back, I have to place it on the fold so that when I cut it open, it is the full shape. And since I used a 4-way stretch, it didn't matter where I cut it out from because it will always stretch side to side. If you are using just a 2-way stretch, make sure that it goes side to side and not up and down on the body. When you're done, pin or clip it together, and then you'll end up taking the measurements of both the front and back neckline and the armholes. This will be an important measurement that we will use for the bindings. So combine the measurements of the front and back neckline, add those up, write that down, and take the armhole measurements and write that down. Next, you're going to sew up the sides and on the shoulder seams of your dress using a stretch stitch or a zigzag stitch. Do not stretch the fabric as you sew if you are using a 4-way stretch fabric. Next, you're going to take those measurements you took earlier and come up with about what 90% of those measurements would be and cut out strips that are that length. 1 for each of the armholes and 1 for the neckline. We're going to be doing a single fold binding, so just make sure that these strips are at least twice the width of your seam allowance. Next, you'll sew each of them into a loop. Then you will attach them to their corresponding holes, right side to right side. It's a little bit difficult to explain exactly, but you can see how I'm attaching it in these clips. Mark the loop in quarters with a tailor's chalk so that you can evenly distribute the stretch. I marked the halfway point of the front neckline and the halfway point of the back neckline and matched each of those little marks up with its corresponding mark. So the midpoint of the back neckline gets matched up with the seam of that loop, and each shoulder seam gets matched up with one of the quarter marks. And match the edges of both the loop and the dress together so that you can fold the loop towards the inside once they're sewn together. And as you're clipping, stretch the loop and clip it in place to the dress, because once you're sewing, you're going to be stretching that loop so that it fits the size of the opening. Use a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch or a serger for this part and only stretch the loop, not the dress's neckline or armhole. When you're done with this, just trim down the seam allowance a little bit. It'll make it less bulky once we flip the binding towards the inside. Make sure not to cut into the stitch, however, so that it comes undone. Keep it intact. Now flip that seam allowance up towards the edge of the binding and then fold the binding over that seam allowance towards the inside of the dress and clip it in place. Do it all the way around the opening. I know I'm showing this for the neckline, but the same exact principles apply to the armhole as well. This is where you can decide how thin or how thick you want your binding to look on your finished dress. I wanted mine pretty thin, and that's why I made sure to trim my seam allowance down as much as I could. And definitely use clips to keep this in place and not pins, because pins are going to be a hassle. Now take this to the sewing machine, and on the right side of the dress, stitch in that little crevice where the binding meets the dress fabric. That is the ditch. And it's very important that it's clipped in place properly so that as you're stitching this, you are also catching the other part of the binding on the underside. And if you're very careful with this stitching in the ditch, you will absolutely not see the stitch at all on the finished product on the outside. And when you're done with this, you should see on the inside that there is this stitch that goes directly all the way around, and then there's going to be some excess fabric that you will just trim off. This excess was important during the sewing process, but you no longer need it. I ended up trying the dress on at this point and realized I wanted the booty to be tighter, so I went back to my machine and took it in on the sides. Then I folded up the bottom part and hemmed it kind of just by tacking it in place and stretching it as I went. It was definitely not perfect, but you don't even have to hem it if you don't want to. She's done. And I am very satisfied with how things turned out with her. I'm gonna get a lot of wear out of this dress. I think it turned out really great. Some things I would do differently. I wouldn't personally change anything about the way that I did this dress. I think it turned out good on the first go around. It is a simple dress, so that's makes sense. The back neckline is a little bit droopy, but I think it's because I accidentally stretched it when I was stitching in the ditch. So something to avoid. I might change the way I hemmed it. You don't even have to hem it because it is a knit. I wanted to because I just wanted this a little bit cleaner. But I know I tacked it down as I showed you in the last part of the tutorial. I might do something differently, I don't know what, but I do want to make the booty tighter. I'm rewatching those videos of myself and I'm realizing I want it to be a little bit tighter. The way the dress rides up and creates all those like folds in the fabric is a major factor of why this dress works, and I don't know why, but there's something very sexy about the illusion. It's not even the illusion because it is riding up, but there's a certain sexiness in like the dress riding up as you're walking because it's so tight, you know? So I might make mine tighter and have it ride up more. Watch out, boys. I need professional help. Yeah, I do want to do the bottom differently because I don't love the way that I hemmed it, but it would be easier if I had a serger. You can do certain invisible things, I don't know. But that's all I would do differently. I wouldn't change anything. Maybe change the shape of the neckline if I was being super picky, because it's not like 100% match. That's not that big of a deal though. I'm gonna wear this dress a lot, so you'll see me in it again. Next week, what are we doing next week? I actually don't know. I have so many ideas that I am having a hard time narrowing it down, and I base a lot of what I decide to make on the fabric that I can find, and I haven't been finding any fabric that is really speaking to me or speaking to any of my ideas. So maybe we'll make this one. Maybe we'll make this one. These are on my list, by the way. Or this one. I don't know yet. If you have a suggestion, let me know. I'll see you next week. I'll be making something. I don't know what it is, but I will be making something, so stay tuned. It's a surprise to you and a surprise to me.